welcome to the Link Online. I'll let you know a little secret. We just had a little chuckle there because we were watching the clock tick down to start time, and I said, "Oh, we've got 5 seconds. No, 2. No, what?"
Here we are.
Here we are. Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Montgomery with and hello.
Hello.
Turn your cell phones off during the film, please.
I'm trying. It doesn't. It's actually, look, it shows it's mute, but it's not.
Well, we have an expert with us today, Shen, who's filling in for Leo, who's filling in for Marie-Claude. He knows about these things. Shen is our technical guru here, or one of them anyway. So, by the way, that is, of course, Shen, and with me, of course, is Levon Savuntz.
Right here.
And Carmel Kilkenny.
Good day.
And in the control room, once again, wondering what the heck we're doing, is Chantal Saint-Sauveur. And at the very back, in the deep, dark reaches of the studio, is our guardian angel, our human resources manager, and the minister of all problem-solving, Pierre Dutil.
Hey, Pierre.
He's admonishing me. All right, let's get going on the program today. I'd just like to say hello to regular listeners, Ursula Wagner, one of the cameras. Hello, Ursula.
Hello, Ursula.
And
we love your letters.
Peter Ashcroft as well, who's a regular.
Peter, of course.
Hello,
Peter, wherever you are, on which camera. All right, let's take a look at what's going on the program today. Carmel, what about you?
Well, I'll tell you about the TP camps in Saskatchewan and what the protesters want for their First Nation children.
Levon?
And I'll speak with a Canadian humanitarian worker about the plight of children in Mosul in northern Iraq.
All right, and in just a moment, I'll have a story about the increasing hardship and danger of being a school teacher. And we'll have those stories and some of your comments coming up on this edition of The Link Online. Well, we all went to school, and we all had teachers we liked and didn't like, but, it's tough being a teacher, a school teacher. In recent years, however, it seems that it's become even a little bit dangerous. The Canadian Teachers Federation, which represents over 230,000 school teachers across Canada, recently did an overview of various studies by member organizations across Canada and some in the U.S. about the incidents and types of violence that teachers were experiencing. And the figures are actually quite disturbing. A majority of school teachers from kindergarten to grade 12 say they have experienced some form of violence during their careers. Discussions with teachers also seems to indicate that the incidence of violence is underreported, as teachers don't have a clear understanding of what to report. They also don't necessarily want to harm a child's future education potential, and they say there's a lack of support from school officials. The report also says lack of funding is leading to a lack of support resources in schools. Now, I spoke to Federation President Mark Ramsankar about the concern, and in this excerpt, I asked him about a statement in that report that said the classrooms today are different than they were even 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, this is true. The complexity of today's classroom, both with the number of students that are present in the classroom, as well as their identifiers for the issues and special needs that they have, lead the teachers to have to deal with a variety of different academic challenges and mental challenges that they haven't had to in the past.
Well, what are they dealing with?
When we're talking about violence towards teachers, it takes many different forms, anywhere from non-physical, verbal barrages, and I do mean beyond, as you say, talking back to the teacher. Some of it is very directed and targeted assaults on the teachers in crude verbal forms. We've seen that and heard reports from our teachers that it's coming with more regularity from parents as well as from students. In terms of physical, we're seeing especially what we found in this literature review with the younger grades, elementary and junior high, middle school. We're seeing a rise of incidences of spitting, biting, scratching, hitting, kicking, these types of responses from students, as well as throwing projectiles at teachers. What we have seen and we do here is that the respect for teachers we see we believe is declined. What we're looking at and our biggest concern here is that the incidences of violence largely are going unreported. as teachers they're afraid for their job security, that if you can't handle an elementary classroom and a child of 5 or 6 years old injures you on the job, that is a real fear for teachers. And we've heard that quite clearly. Understanding who and how to report or what. If you get hit by a 6-year-old and only get a very large bruise, but you don't get incapacitated, does that count as violence, for example? We're saying, like, teachers in these instances I would consider victims. And it's very demoralizing when you're subject to a verbal barrage or even a physical assault, and you're not sure where you can go or whether you have any recourse, or you know that you're returning to that job site tomorrow, and you know that you don't have the supports in place for you to be able to deal with these types of activities. So the mental state that teachers are finding themselves in is very, very difficult, and being able to find the support for them has become increasingly troublesome, and it's been something that our member organizations have been asking for years. We've often talked about supporting children in the classroom. The lack of support for the learning environment we're seeing is now manifesting itself in unsafe environments for teachers. And it's rather alarming that with the numbers that we've received when we've done the research.
And that was an excerpt of my longer conversation with Mark Ramsankar, president of the Canadian Teachers Federation, discussing a new report about violence against school teachers. I find it funny, interesting and surprising even, because when I was in school, you wouldn't talk back to a teacher, and you certainly wouldn't threaten them, and you wouldn't spitting at teachers or hitting.
Yeah, but back then there was still corporal punishment in schools.
Yes, I remember.
The strap, yes.
I remember.
Yeah.
You don't take the kid by the ear, and that's
You
it.
can't do that. You can't do that.
Well,
you can't
listen,
even touch them.
What school did you go to?
Well, I went to a Soviet school, and I can tell you that there was a lot of things that were very good about Soviet education. And one of the things that was good was the respect they instilled for teachers. We had to stand up. I don't know if you had to stand up when the teacher came into the classroom.
Yes, in some classes, depending on the thing. But that doesn't apply anymore in this day and age when there is a teacher cannot touch a child in any way, shape, or form.
It's wrong. I understand that there are some parents that are concerned about the abuse and stuff like that. But I think we're going way overboard in terms of...
But, by the time a child gets to school, it's not the school's fault. It's the family. It's like a societal breakdown, in a sense.
Now, you were nodding your head in agreement when...
Yeah, when I was in primary and high school in China, I grown up. I think that most of the time you have to stand up, in front of teachers. When teacher came into the class and when I talk to the teacher, you have to be very respectful.
Yeah, you wouldn't dream of spitting at the teacher or hitting.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a beautiful kind of a respect to the... Yeah.
And a 6-year-old causing a bruise, come on.
Well,
but
sure.
There again, this goes back to the family. It's
if
what
you
you
get
were
a kick
raised
in the
at.
shins from a 6-year-old.
Yeah, but listen, this to me talks about the fact that if you cannot handle a 6-year-old, if you allow a 6-year-old kick you in the shins, then you probably shouldn't be in the classroom in the first place.
But they said the point in the piece was that teachers are not reporting this, but this is what they're experiencing. And as we know, a 6-year-old who cannot control their emotions and is lashing out like that, these are problems, and these are problems that have to be flagged and dealt with. So, I don't remember anybody kicking when I was in grade 1. Those things were, the upbringing back home established what you were going into classrooms with.
This just speaks about a bigger problem
in society, in general.
Society, in our families, and I think sometimes sometimes you just have to be a bit more firm with kids.
Yeah. Well, okay. There's a point of discussion. If you have thoughts on this,
we're going to get a lot of letters.
Well,
on
no,
this.
good. No, let's have it.
And I'm glad my kids are way older now, so I don't get a visit from the Youth Protection Agency anymore.
Well, anyway, if you are a school teacher, drop us a line. Tell us what some of your thoughts are, or if you have experienced this or know something about it or whatever. Drop us a line.
They're enjoying their break right now.
Yeah, well,
across Canada.
Well deserved.
School
break.
is out. Yes, it is.
School's out. Seems to me that was an old song. Anyway, we have more coming up the program in just a moment. Well, our next story began in the capital of Saskatchewan, Regina, and one teepee put up in a park near the legislature. That happened back in February, and that was in response to the acquittal of two men accused in the deaths of two young First Nations people, Colton Boushie in Saskatchewan and Tina Fontaine in Manitoba. Carmel, this is your story.
Yes, well, now there are 13 teepees set up in Regina and one teepee in the city of Saskatoon. Chris Martel put up his tent there last Tuesday in memory of the 22-month-old son who drowned while in foster care back in 2010. Martel describes his space as a healing camp, and the whole idea of this is justice for our stolen children. The organizers want a dialogue with the provincial government about the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the foster care system and inequality in the justice system. They had one meeting with 5 government ministers last week and were waiting on another. Right now, Premier Scott Moe says there will not be another meeting and is requesting the camps be dismantled. In Saskatoon, the city has given Chris Martel and his supporters 10 days for the protest, but everyone seems to recognize in the wake of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, changes will have to be made. Judy Hughes is president of the Saskatchewan Aboriginal Women's Circle and a member of the Native Women's Association of Canada. She met the protesters in Regina in mid-June, and I began by asking her how it all got started.
Initially, it's a call in regards to what is better known as the 60 Scoops, when several First Nation children were taken from their parents and adopted out across, mostly in the U.S., but in other places in Canada. And this is a way for Indigenous people, particularly First Nations, saying that they want to be able to have the authority over care and well-being of their own children.
Why Saskatchewan? Are the most children in care in that province? Why is it such an issue in Saskatchewan as opposed to all the other provinces and places across Canada?
Well, there is an incredible number of Indigenous children in care in Saskatchewan. I don't have the exact number, and it seems to be increasing every year, and it's becoming quite a crisis for families because for one reason or another, they're not able to have proper access to the children and following a proper method in terms of having the families reunified with them in the family home.
That's what I was going to ask. What happens to the children when they go into care? They're not going into other Indigenous families.
Well, for the most part, what it is when they're going into care, then they're put into foster homes. And appropriately, it should be going into First Nations or Indigenous homes, but we have a severe lack of foster homes in Saskatchewan and also in terms of Indigenous foster homes as well. And a lot of that has to do with the very high, strict standards that is set by the provincial government that's not very culturally appropriate for Indigenous children.
What do the First Nations and Indigenous people want? What do they want to come out of this camp?
Well, I think, from some of the things that when SOC sat down or NWAC sat down with them and talked with them a couple of weeks ago in Regina, and some of the key factors is that they want to be able to have care and control of their own children when they're in care. They want to be able to sit at the tables. There is a ministerial round table that does discuss the issues around Indigenous children and children in care, and they want to be sitting at that table to have their voice heard, but I think primarily looking at the factor that Indigenous people and First Nations and Métis people are the ones that have the best knowledge in terms of their children, and to be able to have part of like our own regulations and standards around care and foster care of children in Saskatchewan.
That was Judy Hughes, president of the Saskatchewan Aboriginal Women's Circle, and they're, of course, a member of the Native Women's Association of Canada. I'll be following the developments over the summer, but just to clarify, when she said it was several thousand children in the 60 Scoop, Aboriginal children who were taken from families and adopted out. And, of course, the larger context of this is the legacy of the residential school system, where basically families broke down. Children were not raised by their parents. They were raised in institutions, many of them in appalling conditions. So the continuum of family life has been shredded, and now basically the Aboriginal people in this particular protest in Saskatchewan are demanding a seat at the table and a greater say. And just to give you an example of the structural racism, as Judy was telling me later, in most normal families, 2 or 3 little kids share a room, that's all fine. In foster care, it has to be 1 bedroom for 1 child. Very few Indigenous families are in that position. Very few families are in that position. So these standards are really unattainable, and so they have to start working with the Aboriginal communities to make changes.
The thing with the residential schools, as we've said on this program before, is that, as you pointed out, the family would break. There's a separation there because
the children were taken as early as 4 and 5 and often not returned or didn't return to their homes.
So they didn't understand how to be a parent, and now that they became parents, they had difficulty in their relationship with their family, and because they had difficulties, their children. So it's gone on through several generations, yes. This ripple effect, as it were. All right, so you'll be watching that story as the summer goes on. All right, we're going to have some of your letters to our various stories coming up. We've got some comments that people have posted to our various stories, and of course you can post to all of the RCI stories. The public commenting is open on all stories, and we had several comments to a story about Health Canada recalling high blood pressure drugs containing valsartan due to a cancer risk, and Leah Yanto wrote with some personal concerns.
I've been taking this medication for a number of years. How is the chance of having cancer? Why are we buying drugs from China? Will I be tested for any types of cancer due to having taken valsartan for a number of years? Who will contact me with explanations addressing my concerns?
Now, on the same story about this blood pressure drug, valsartan, Terry Cole wrote,
So is anyone planning a class action lawsuit? My husband takes this too.
And we had a very direct comment from Yvonne Harding on the Canadian recall of the drug valsartan.
My mom has been taking valsartan for years and is now in the hospital because she had bladder cancer. She's had 3 surgeries and they finally had to remove her bladder. These 3 surgeries were done in 1 month, in a 1-month period, and she's now so weak that we have to teach her how to walk again. So why did it take so long for this medication to be recalled? And why are we buying this crap from China?
And this comment on the same subject, this time from Charlene Simon.
Why aren't we told when we purchase prescription drugs that they are generics from China? When will information and testing be available to patients who have used the contaminated products? This must be dealt with immediately to address the concerns raised.
Now, there were other posts to this story as well. We won't go into them, but many were simply asking the question, why are we buying drugs from China? So now moving on, we had a reply this week to a story of a year ago about the WannaCry computer virus. I really don't understand myself about the last statement of this person, because the hope, when he says no hope, we hope North Korea will find a solution, and that's because experts kind of feel the virus seems to have originated in North Korea. So here's what Norton had to say.
I already heard about the infection, but after reading this article, I get a clearer view on it, and now I'm able to understand how it is affected on the world web. Hopefully, there will be some new discovery by North Korea to get rid of this.
Well, I guess since they allegedly created it, they might allegedly also find a cure for it.
One would hope that if you have invented something that's bad, you know how to correct it as well. Anyway, but that's another story. All right, earlier this spring, we had a story on the Ottawa Tulip Festival, and someone listed as assignment commented.
It was amazing, and I think everybody enjoyed a lot. Tulips are always very nice flowers, and blooming festivals were really special.
I'm so glad to hear that letter. I just want to say I did that story. I love the Tulip Festival, and I've never been.
Really?
I mean, it's so simple to go. It's a 2-hour drive down to Ottawa, and each year, each May, I say, this is the year I'm going, and I don't. So next year. I'm glad somebody got the pleasure of it.
It is a very nice-looking festival.
I'm sure.
If you love flowers.
I do. Well, I love tulips. I love those rows and rows
it's
of them.
everywhere. It's just, it's part of it's not just one place. You go to Ottawa and you walk anywhere in downtown, you see this beds of flowers.
And this all originated, of course, back in the Second World War when the Canadian queen, or the Dutch queen, came to Canada to avoid the Nazis and gave birth to the princess. And so, as a thank you, Holland has been sending thousands and thousands of tulip bulbs to Canada every year so they can have this festival. So that's very nice.
We're grateful for their gratitude.
Indeed. All right, we had a nutty story, a successful nutty story. This is, Carl, this is your story. It goes back to 2015.
I remember this, yes.
It's a company in New Brunswick called G.E. Barber. It's producing nut butters like peanut butter and almond butter and doing very well. And this was your story, and Nadine Daigle wrote this week.
Love the peanut butter. Can't seem to find it in a store near me. Plus, it's much healthier than the other brands. I love peanut butter, too.
Back to the present, and a story from a couple of weeks ago to end on, and this was about the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans doing a marine mammal survey in the Pacific, and Deborah Winkler wrote this.
It should be considered that Chinook salmon, a mainstay for the resident orcas, feast on baby herring. When the herring fishery is allowed to go ahead, killing the adult fish to harvest the eggs, well, a herring can live 5 years. A small piece in the puzzle shouldn't be so hard for the DFO to figure out. DFO is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Look also at the salmon farms and their influence. There are people that would love to tell that story.
Okay, so those
would love to hear that story. If anybody is listening right now and wants to share some of their experiences with salmon farms out on BC coast.
Or anywhere for that matter. Yeah. All right, on that point, we'll leave our letters for this week. Once again, you can comment to any of the RCI stories. Just go down to the bottom of the page and the form to fill out there is there. Thank you for sharing all of your stories with us, and we have more coming up in just a moment. We're going to end on an international story, and it has been a year since Iraqi forces liberated Mosul from ISIS or Daesh. But the city's children are still living in near constant fear for their lives. And a new report from Save the Children, that's an NGO, says children are haunted by memories of devastation, displacement, bombing, extreme violence. And Levon, you looked into this story. What's going on here?
Well, Mark, it's a dire situation. Hundreds of thousands of children are living in this rubble left by the fighting to recapture Mosul. And Mosul was once Iraq's second largest city. The report says children are reporting serious emotional problems, depression, extreme anxiety, and have been pushed to breaking point. Even teenagers report being too scared to venture out alone or stay without their parents or guardians. For more on this, I spoke with Bill Chambers. He's the president and CEO of Save the Children Canada, and he was in Iraq earlier this year. And I began by asking, why does the report focus on adolescents?
So, as you may know, the population of Iraq is very, very young. So 60% of Iraqis are under 25 years old. And one of the things that we're trying to understand is how can we support the group that is just about to go into what we consider adulthood and will and should play a very important role in developing the future of Iraq and finding a way out of the current chaos, frankly, in a way that is healthy and secure. We want to understand how best to serve that population. We're in a phase in terms of the humanitarian response to Iraq of stabilization, of reconstruction, and of recovery. And what we wanted to ensure that when we say those things, we think, okay, let's build a school, let's make sure that the water is returned to normal sanitary and hygiene levels. All the infrastructure is in place. We want to ensure that in this particular case, and because I think the future of Iraq and the region depends on it, that we do that in a way that takes account of the needs of the next generation of leaders of Iraq and of Kurdistan, and that's that segment of 13 to 17-year-olds. We had done a previous assessment of them right after the liberation of Mosul a year ago. It demonstrated a very, very high level of what we call toxic stress, and now we're finding a very high level of what we call cumulative stress, and that's something that can live with you your whole life and affect how you operate. So we need to ensure that in designing the stabilization and reconstruction of society there, that we look to also providing opportunities for these young people to work through some of what they've lived in, regain their sense of resilience and an optimism about the future, and give them the tools that they need to adjust. For the most part, we're talking about adjusting on their own. It's providing them and their guardians. You'd like to think their parents, but in a lot of cases, it's their communities and their extended family who are taking care of them, because everyone has had people die in their families. So to provide them with the tools just to cope with basic, very high stress, with depression, with ongoing fear and anxiety, just kind of basic tools to provide them community outlets, to create child-friendly spaces where they can go and interact with each other in a safe environment, because their homes are not safe. Their homes don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can walk alone without their parents and be secure. They don't feel that their schools are at all. They've come back to schools that are not only damaged and sometimes destroyed, but have dead bodies still in them.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Bill Chambers, and he's the CEO and president of Save the Children Canada.
I just wonder, what is the world going to be like? Because we have all these, we have proxy wars and low-level wars and internal conflicts and other things going on with, children are being subjected to this all around the world.
We're witnessing the outcome in terms of the migratory flow, all of the people escaping places like this and the movement into Europe and, frankly, now coming across the border into Canada.
Well, it's not even that. I mean, often they're going to the neighboring country. They're leaving, say, for example, Mali and other places like that, and they're in these huge refugee camps where they're theoretically safe, but it's terrible conditions.
Just look, the story I did today on the humanitarian agencies calling for a ceasefire in southwestern Syria. You have close to 300,000 people who fled this latest government offensive, and they're stuck on the border between Jordan and Israel in the occupied Golan Heights. And Jordan has already admitted almost 1.5 million Syrian refugees. They simply cannot take any more, and Israel says no. There's no way they're going to let them to cross. So you have a whole generation of children in Iraq, in Syria, that it's basically a lost generation.
Several countries in Africa.
Well, yeah, in Africa as well. I mean, this is it just seems that if you put out a fire in one country, then there's a fire starting in the other country, kind of thing. So,
and then we worry about children kicking teachers here.
It keeps. Some of these children are refugee children, and some of these children I know in Toronto. My sister teaches in a school, and many of them are the people arriving from refugee camps, and integrating them into the school system takes a lot of time and patience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they may be acting out on situations that they've experienced before, you know. But I mean, no, to get back to the teachers, I mean, if you're a teacher, you don't want a little child kicking you for any reason. Right?
No, absolutely, I understand. It's just I think we need to bring a bit of perspective into the kind of problems that our kids are facing. We're very fortunate to be living in this country, and
sure.
kids in other countries who would die for the chance
Wrong
of...
word. They would prefer to live here.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, that's all the time we have for the program for today. My name is Mark Montgomery, along with Carmel Kilkenny, Levon Savants, Ershen on the keyboards, and in the control room, Chantal Saint-Sauveur. Thank you so much. And once again, drop us a line if you want to comment on anything we've discussed today in the program. Take care until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
One of these cameras works, right?
This one.
This one. Situations that they've experienced before, you know. But I mean, no, to get back to the teachers, I mean, if you're a teacher, you don't want a little child kicking you for any reason. Right?
No, absolutely, I understand. It's just I think we need to bring a bit of perspective into the kind of problems that our kids are facing. We're very fortunate to be living in this country, and
sure.
kids in other